I know a few of you here in the room. I'm the Franklin Grand Isle County Forester. I work for the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. And I'm here because Karen and I got together and started talking about a project that might be of interest to the Rotary Club and working with students and the community to do some improvement on a small section of Stevens Brook. So I'm going to kind of go over a little bit about what invasive species are and what their concerns are, and maybe talk a little bit. It's going to be a pretty brief run through about this. I do want to say, first of all, that if you have a question while I'm speaking, please just interrupt me, because it's always better for me to have that conversation when it's right in the top of your brain, that I can answer your questions if you have them. So don't be shy. Feel free to stop me. I know I have sort of limited time, and I'm going to rely on Karen to actually keep me under wraps.
When it's 5 minutes left off.
That would be awesome. So really, we're going to be talking about invasive plants today, and what are they? What are non-native invasive plants? Why do we care? And how can you help? How can you make a difference around this really big issue that we have? I've got a few pictures. This is not a very clear screen. I probably should have done this ahead of time. Don't really know how to work that projector. We're just going to deal with it. So looking up at top, that's hay-scented fern. It's a native plant. In the middle is a wild apple tree. Anybody know, is that a native plant or a non-native plant?
Native.
Native? Anybody have another idea? This is a non-native plant. So apple trees actually originate from the Caucasian mountains. They were spread throughout Europe, and then the colonialists brought them here. So the apple trees are not native to the United States or North America, but they have proliferated. Are they invasive? No, they are not invasive. They do not take over areas. They spread very slowly. The top one, that hay-scented fern, native plant, is it invasive? Some people say it is. The new definition for Vermont and New England is if it's native, then it is not invasive. It has a role in the ecosystem, and it usually will move out of the system at its right time. The bottom one is a barberry plant. Barberry is either European or Asian. There's two different kinds of species. Does that look invasive? Yeah. Yes, it is. So this is a non-native invasive plant taking over a woodland. If you have a sugar bush and it looks like that, you're in trouble. If you have a riparian area and it looks like that, you're in trouble. So what makes a good plant go bad? There are nothing that eats them, and that is the biggest part about it. There's nothing that eats invasive plants. You can see this is Japanese knotweed, and there's a Japanese beetle on it. It's the only thing that will eat the Japanese knotweed is a Japanese beetle. You have nothing here in the United States that will eat this plant. And so that also means it's really bad for wildlife, because songbirds are attracted to plants because they have bugs on them. So they're attracted to the fruit, but they're actually it's more useful for a bird to be attracted to the bugs that are eating the plants. So if there's no bugs eating those plants, then they're useless for our native flora, our native fauna. The other thing is that they're very, very competitive. They have abundant seed production, just a plethora of fruit. They spread really rapidly through either their roots or through their fruit. And they have effective dispersal mechanisms, wind, birds, animals. And they are very good at using light and nutrients. As a matter of fact, one of the theories for the proliferation of invasive species, because we've had buckthorn in this area for about 100 years, but we haven't, when I was in college 35 years ago, we never even spoke about it. It has exploded since then. And one of the theories is climate change. If there's more carbon in the air, we have far more carbon in the air than we did 50 years ago. And these are C4 plants. Most of our invasive plants use carbon more efficiently than our native plants, so they actually have a competitive edge now. So that's a theory. It's not. There's some grounding in science. Just really importantly is that in Vermont we have about 2,000 plants, and 32% of those plants are non-native. But only 8% of them are invasive non-natives. So, there's a whole lot of plants out there that we plant in our gardens and we plant in our flower beds, and they don't take off and spread around. Some of them do. Some of them become a problem. And why are they a problem? Wilson, one of the greatest biologists still living on the planet, he's in his late 80s now, has said that there's only two things that are the great destroyers of our ecosystems. One is conversion, is turning it into something else, and invasive plants. and plants and insects. So invasive species, exotic species. Those are the biggest destroyers of our natural ecosystems. But you know, we can control it. One of the reasons it's so prevalent in the Champlain Valley is because this is where we settled a long time ago. This is where wealth was created. So the wealthier you were, the more interesting it was to have cool plants in your yard. So everyone was bringing in these interesting plants. You go up in the hills where the poor farmers were, they didn't plant barberries. They didn't have those kinds of plants. And also where you didn't turn the soil over and turn it into cropland, which destroys the microorganisms and all the tiny bacteria and everything that's in the soil. Where soil has never been turned over, there's a lesser incidence of invasive species. So it's harder for them to get a foothold because the ecosystem is still intact. When we changed the ecosystem, we made it easier for these invasive plants to get in. So this is an interesting curve here. The best time to capture that invasive species, that's why we spend a lot of time up in the hills. And when I talk to sugar makers and they get some on the edge of their woods, I get it now before it spreads into your woods. Get it early. Where the happy smiley face is, that's where it hardly is. But you hardly notice it either. So if you don't notice it, it's not even in the system, you don't really pay attention. A little bit, oh, you just detected it. You're still kind of happy because you can still get it. But then, oh, you're really noticing it. And by the time that you're like, it's there, you see it, it's too late. So you got to learn how to pay attention to these plants and know where they are, know what they look like, in order to keep it from being a problem on your own community. Now I'm going to shift into what it's already a problem here. It's a problem on Stevens Brook. It's a problem throughout the Champlain Valley. But so what do we do with it? We want to control it. We want to manage it. We want to make sure that the rest of the ecosystem has a chance. And so if other plants can have a chance to survive, then the invasive plants can still be in that system. We can't get rid of them most of the time, but we can control them. So where you find the area where it's most dense, go from as far out and move in. So you're actually containing it, keeping it under control, but getting the outlier plants first so that the ecosystem outside that area of origin is going to be able to succeed. So here's the Stevens Brook riparian area that we're talking about. This is at the corner of Aldous and Elm. So there's just a stretch, and I'm not even sure the ownership. And so I just put a circle around the area between the railroad tracks and where I knew that it was no longer going to be land that's town garage. Maybe I'll come over here. It's hard if you're not familiar with photographs, aerial photographs. This is the town garage or the city garage. I'm not sure which is which.
City.
Thank you. Carrie's here, she can help me. So there's the city, and then there's some ball fields there. And there's this brook, here's Stevens Brook, right through the middle. Stevens Brook's been straightened here. You can tell, you don't usually see brooks that are arrowed straight. So over the generations and years, the railroad tracks were put in, the roads were put in, everything was put in, so this was straightened. So by straightening it, you also affected that whole system. So it's been degraded and changed. But that's the area, it's about 4 acres. Again, I don't quite know the ownership, but certainly the town garage and the ball field side of the brook is something that can be worked. And these are I'm going to quickly run through the plants that we found out there. The most dominant one is buckthorn. So buckthorn is throughout the system. I have to say, when I spoke to Karen on the phone initially, I had this image in my brain like, ooh, yeah, I know how degraded that stream is. Oh, it's going to be bad. When we really got down there, there's a nice overstory of tree species. There's native plants there, but there is this invasive component as well. So it's something that could be managed. It isn't beyond control at this point. So buckthorn is really it changes soil chemistry. Is bad for species. The fruit of the buckthorn is this black fruit, and it's cathartic. So it doesn't give the animals any nutrition, and it gets spread really quickly because of its cathartic capabilities. What you want to do here, we're going to not talk about herbicide control at all today, because that's not something that you would want to do with children or could do, because it would have to be done with someone with a commercial license. So we're just going to be talking about manual control. So you want to pull them up if you can, or you want to cut them down, girdle the stem, and try cutting them over and over. You can see you can use a weed wrench, which is down at the bottom, or just cut them down and repeat cutting them down. The other one that's a big problem along all of our streams and also down here is Japanese knotweed. Japanese knotweed, people always used to, some of this is our fault too. A lot of I have a book in my office that talks about, oh, the wonderful plants you can plant for erosion control. Oh, the wonderful plants you can plant for songbirds. Yeah, we just didn't know what we were doing. Hubris is a really good thing to remember when you're trying to change the environment. Keeping it natural is a better idea. Those barberry plants that we used to plant as state foresters are really bad for the environment. The knotweed was an erosion control method. It absolutely does not hold soil. So it does not control erosion. Actually, it exacerbates erosion. So it's an incredible plant. Every single piece of this plant, if it falls on the ground, can root. So it's an amazing survivalist. These things are great survivalists. And really, really hard to get rid of for that reason. So we want to dig it up if it's little, smother it for a couple of years. We could try that, or you can cut it 4 or 5 times a year for 5 years. So you got to keep after it. Some places, herbicide control is the only thing that can be done, but that's probably not something that you want to do. You'd have to hire someone to do that. And it's a small stretch. It's really more about engaging the community, bringing in some education, teaching people what they can do on their own properties, and maybe treating this particular one site as almost a garden that the city can actually maintain and say, look, you can do this. You can do this, you can do it this way. You can do it without herbicides if you keep at it. The other one that I noticed out there that was Norway maple. It's ubiquitous across the landscape because we planted it all over the streets of St. Albans. So if you want to look at a big tree that looks like a maple tree but it has that reddish hue to it, or sometimes we call it Crimson King, that's that burgundy color one, but it comes in a green color too. If the burgundy seed hits the regenerates, it's green. It's not red. The only red trees are clones. So along BFA is a good example of some really big Norways. Those are Norway maples. They spread their seeds all over the place. Little critters don't eat them. If a mouse has a choice between a sugar maple and a Norway maple, they're going to go for that sugar maple every time, just as you would if you were a little mouse. Because maple trees are good, sweet, nutritious. Norway maples, not so much. And you can't tell them apart. Really hard to tell them apart. You don't want them in your sugar bush either. You don't want them on the riparian area as well because they're spreading seeds. They have those wide wings. Instead of the Samara with the helicopter shape, they have a wide Samara. And that's one way you can tell them apart. Got to dig those up as well. You can keep cutting them, girdle the stem. But identifying them when they're little is hard. You need some help for that. Honeysuckle is another one. We didn't see a lot of it down there, but I know it's there. It's got to be. So this one just spreads all over the place. Really bad for songbirds. Really takes over. I walked through a forest once where I didn't even put my foot on the ground. It was a riparian area down in South Burlington. And it was this beautiful overstory of silver maple. And the understory was pure honeysuckle. By the way, I had to get my way out of there. I was basically walking on the top of honeysuckle the whole way out. It was so dense. There will never be a forest there again. Once those trees die, once those overstory die, there won't be a forest there. So this is something that, for foresters, is a really big deal. That we have to make sure that we're regenerating our forests in some way, somehow, to keep our forests intact.
So let me ask you, how do you eradicate that?
So honeysuckle is an easy one to pull, actually. It's probably one of the easiest ones to pull. So you pull that out of the ground. In a situation that I just described, the only way you could do it would be through a mist blower herbicide use. You really couldn't get it any other way. So we don't want it to ever get there. We don't ever want it to get to that point. And then there's also tree planting that will have to take place in that kind of a condition. Or the forest, because you don't want to lose that forest either. It's a riparian area. And it's important to the stream quality. It's important to shading the stream, keeping it cool, limiting erosion. Here's an example of honeysuckle, how it's taken over an understory. You can pull it up when it's little, and then try repeated cuttings again. Again, when it's as bad as those pictures are, the only way you're going to deal with it is is herbicide control. But we don't have to worry about that. That's not what's going on at Stevens Brook, where we're talking about. But the other thing that we want to think about doing once we get a kind of control over those invasive species and do it a little bit at a time. You know, that's the thing about a project like this, is there's 4 acres there. 4 acres doesn't sound a lot like a lot of land, especially to some of you out in the audience here that I know have lots of land. You know, 4 acres is a little bit. But you know, that's how you deal with invasive species. You do it little bit by little bit. And so you can take an area, get rid of the invasives, and then plant some trees. And I'm suggesting things like silver maple and some of the oaks, particularly the white oaks. Bur oak is an excellent species. It's a riparian area. Swamp white oak. Red oak grows the fastest. So planting a mix of species always is the right answer. Remember when we used to plant elm trees all up and down the streets of St. Albans and they all died, and then we planted green ash all up and down the streets of our Midwest and they all died. And so, you know, don't plant all one species. It's always a bad idea. Silver maple is the perfect species of tree for a riparian area, but so are elms. And if you can get any of the resistant elms planted, that's a help. Also, multiple varieties of oaks. Then there's other species as well, but I'm thinking, you know, we talked about this. If there's 4 acres, we'd have to finally decide actually what land is able to be manipulated. It may be only 2 acres. So maybe 100 small trees per acre could be planted, and then planting them in those shelters that you can see behind the little guy. And then up in the other corner, there's tree shelters that you put over these trees so that they act like little greenhouses, so the trees grow faster. They're also protected from voles and mice and protected from the other plants. So this gives an opportunity for the trees to grow up, also protects them from deer. Those areas will be full of deer as well, and some of the shelters you can get are telescoping, so you can have them layered. And so once a tree is this high, it's pretty much done for deer browse. The deer aren't going to be after it anymore. But between mid-calf and my nose, that's deer country, and they will eat everything they can get near them. So all you hunters out there, go kill some deer, and kill a lot of them. And talk to your folks and change the rules. Kill more deer. Anyway, this is my last Aldo Leopold, my hero, conservationist, father of conservation. An action is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, beauty, and stability of a living community, and wrong when it tends to do otherwise. So when you can bring all of the species, all the cogs and wheels, back to an ecosystem, you are making it a healthy, functioning ecosystem that can benefit all kinds of things. But if you're doing something that isn't following what nature's rules are, you're going to have problems, and that's where our problems have come from. We change things, and we made things different, and the differences have come back to bite us a little bit. So I have more on these slides, but I think my time looks like it's probably up. I still have 5 minutes, so 5 minutes is good for some questions. Yeah.
Nancy, I thought when you have like a small cluster of that invasive species with the red bark, what is that, buckthorn?
Buckthorn.
I thought if you cut it with a saw and gave it a quick treatment with like an herbicide, that'll kill it. Is that true? And is that something that as a homeowner on a small tract of land you would recommend? So
if you're a homeowner, you can spray herbicide on your own land. If you cannot spray herbicide on somebody else's land, so if it's your land and you want to manage it with herbicide, a cut stump treatment does work, but it doesn't always work. So especially the littler ones don't seem to really get nailed by that. There's a couple different herbicide treatments you can do. One's a cut stump, which is using an herbicide that's glyphosate, Roundup. You get a 25% concentration of that. You cut the tree, and then in August or September, probably late September. So at that point in time, the tree is naturally bringing all of its nutrients down into its roots. So if you do it in September, you can tell these all these plants leaf out early and hold their leaves the longest. So they also have the longest growing season, a longer growing season than our native plants do. It's another competitive edge. So you can see them though. That makes it easy to see them in the spring, and it makes them easy to see them in the fall. And so you can apply that glyphosate to the cut stump, and it'll suck that herbicide down into the roots and kill it. And it usually works on those 2 to 3 inch size trees, up to larger trees, but the little ones. And then there's always a seed source too, so you got to constantly be at it. Yeah.
Nancy, how do people who own shoreland deal with invasive species given the fact that we've got the Shoreline Protection Act now, that the purpose of which is to try to maintain stabilization of banks and so forth. What?
Yeah. So
How do you do
with the Shoreline Protection Act, you can remove invasive species. What you can't do is remove the duff area or remove the soil. I mean, that's one of the things about the Shoreline Protection Act. But you can control invasive species in that act.
So if we were counseling a landowner that had a lot of lakeshore, would it be wise to document that with photographs and maybe have a forester like yourself who would confirm that what was being removed was invasive?
Oh yes, I think it would be really important to do that, and probably bring in the Shoreline, the DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation. They're the ones in charge of. You can call me, but I would probably bring them into it because they're the ones in charge of the Shoreline Protection Act. And then yes, you would want to document it, and then there'd be some other recommendations of what to plant, because you might want to do some planting after you remove the invasive species, and also an herbicide treatment next to the shoreline is other limitations. So this is something that you really need to hire a professional to do, unless if you're doing anything more than cutting and pulling. Yeah. Yes.
So I pulled an invasive species out, and now I have it in my hand. And so, do I drop it on the ground?
Oh, you're so smart.
Do I put it in a bag? do I burn it? What?
Good. That's an excellent question, and I think you asked it because you probably know, because it was a really good question. You don't ever want to put one on the ground again because they all root really well. So you put one. What I do with buckthorn is I pull a bunch of buckthorn up and I put it in the crotch of a tree, so the roots are off the ground and they dry out and die that way. And most of the plants you can do that. The only one that you really can't would be garlic mustard. Garlic mustard can't be composted. It can't be. It'll just, you can't get rid of it. You have to bag it and bring it to the landfill. And it's a horrible thing to think about, that you could put all of this garlic mustard. But garlic mustard also has we're learning a little bit more about it. It tends to dissipate over time, though it keeps spreading out from its center of origin. But eventually it kind of disappears and other plants come back in again, but it still spreads. It's a tough one. But most of the others don't put them back on the ground. Knotweed, every part, like I said, every single part of that plant will re-root. So you want to get rid of the knotweed. Burning knotweed is a good idea. Feeding it to goats. Goats are awesome. If you can figure out a way to get goats on your landscape and do it smart, so they're only in for a bit, they'll eat anything and they metabolize, where horses and cows do not metabolize, or sheep do not metabolize these plants. They just go through them and it spreads all over. Horses are the worst for spreading seed. And so that's one of the things why we don't often want horses on all of our state lands.
The landfill folks don't want any lawn cutlings or anything like that.
Some of these don't compost, right? They have to be really, really hot compost, and town road crews are learning more and more. That's how some of the knotweed has been spread, and we know that the other chervil has spread through the timing of cutting, has spread the seed, and the knotweed just gets pulled on the equipment and just gets spread all over in the ditches. There's there's piles of soil in town garages that came from excavating some of this stuff, and that's just going to get spread more. So that's one thing that town road crews are really learning more and more about over time, that they, instead of spreading it, they need to get rid of that seed source. It's a tough one. Those are good questions, but we didn't really talk about the project, but I'll let Karen talk more about that. And the idea was to perhaps buy some trees, get the Rotary to work with some students and do some invasive plant control, and maybe buy some trees at the same time. And we're thinking, but depending on, I'll be done in 2 seconds just to finish something.
Take 10.
No. Because I didn't want to lose track of why I was asked to come here. I mean, I can talk about invasive species for days. And so, so thinking about perhaps buying some trees and doing this slowly over time, a little bit every year. Spring planting or fall planting, either one is good, but kind of focus on an area, remove the invasive species, plant the trees, and then go back to that same area and control them for a number of years.
Nancy, I'd like to have you back in the spring when we get close to doing that project.
Sure.
We'll have you kind of fire us all up again on that, get us some more information on the specific project. You thinking like April? Does that work? Or-
Yeah, April would work to especially look at the site, or if anybody wanted to do that. And I think there's some coordination that somebody's gonna need to take hold of in order to work with some schools. It's really tough to get students, there's a curriculum connection that needs to be made. It can be made, but teachers need to be interested in order to follow up with it. So finding the right connection is really a critical piece to all of this. And if it's not students, maybe it's just Rotary and family. You know, that's not an opportunity as well. So you can, and it's, you get the school, you get the ball fields right next door. It's kind of a neat place to have a picnic and kind of a fun place to be. You can have games and play and also work and do some of that. Just a thought.
Thank you. That'd be great.
Awesome, and anytime anybody wants me to speak about any of these things, I'm happy to come back. I've got a list of topics. Yeah, anything you want to hear about.
We'll have you back.
Okay.
Nancy, on behalf of the Rotary, we'd like to thank you for coming to educate us so much. Thank you.
All right.